everyone, it's Kathy, and today I'll be sharing a Slimline card using the new 5-frame Slimline die, the Happy Everything stamp set, as well as the new Bizzy Bees stamp set. I'm only going to show how I colored one of the bees. They're really easy to color, so I chose to show how I colored this guy, mostly because of his sunglasses. But to start out, I started adding in the shadows with BV000. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I do like to use that underneath my yellow markers just to desaturate the yellow a little bit. Next, I came in with Y19 and blended out the BV000 and extended the lines past the BV000. Then I filled in the rest of the yellow areas with Y15. For his stripes and his hand and his little feet, I used BV29, BV25, and BV23. I started with the BV29 and added that where the shadows would be the darkest, and I'm trying to leave a nice center highlight on the center of his body, so that's why there's so much white space. I blended that out with BV25, still leaving white space in the center for the center highlight, and I filled in a little bit on his antenna and his hand, and then for his feet I added the BV25 at the bottom of his feet and left the tops white so I could fill that in with the BV23. For his little sunglasses, I switched over to some cool gray markers and I did the outer edges with C5. I blended that out with C3 and then I filled in the rest of it with C1. I set him aside and then I started to work on my bits and pieces for my card. I ran the 5 frames die through my Gemini Junior with a piece of yellow cardstock and a piece of white cardstock. I wanted to change the color of the frames, and rather than run it through a third time with black cardstock, I just grabbed my black Copic marker and used that to color the yellow frames. I made sure to not only color on top but go around the edges on the outside of the frame as well as the inside of the frame, just to cover up all of the yellow edges. Once I had all of those colored up, I set those aside. Then I took the white pieces, which is the actual inside of the frame, and set those up in my MISTI so I could stamp my sentiment. The sentiments are from the Happy Everything stamp set. I used a little bit of temporary adhesive on the back of those rectangles just to hold them in place. I lined up the stamps and then I stamped the sentiments using VersaFine Onyx black ink. I did stamp the sentiments twice just to make sure that I got a nice bold impression. So after I had those stamped up, I set that aside and started to add a whole bunch of adhesive to the back of the yellow frame. I used 1/8 inch score tape for this, and you could use liquid glue if you are so inclined, but typically liquid glue is not my friend and I usually end up getting it all over the place. So instead I chose to use the score tape and I placed that on all 4 edges, removed the release paper, and then I put a piece of acetate down on top. I cut a piece of acetate to just under 3 1/4 inches by 8 1/2 inches. And I left it at 8 1/2 inches, so the only thing I had to worry about lining up were the top 2 corners. Then I just trimmed off the excess acetate with my scissors. Next, I wanted to adhere the frames and the sentiments on the front so that I would remember where I was going to end up putting my shaker bits. Again, I used score tape for this. I did find the easiest way to line up the frames inside the die was to kind of hold it at an angle and line up those bottom 2 corners and then flatten it out and press everything into place. For the white rectangles with the sentiments on it, I just used my tape runner to adhere those into place. Once I had all of those bits and pieces adhered in place, I flipped it over and I added a whole bunch of sticky foam strips to the back side. I'm not going to torture you and make you watch me put all of the foam tape on there, but I do want to mention that when you're putting the foam tape on the back side around the areas where your shaker bits are going to go, you do want to make sure that you have really good contact between the pieces of the adhesive so that your shaker bits don't fall out. To stabilize the areas where I don't have any shaker bits, I just put one strip of the sticky foam strips down the center of that, just so that section didn't sink down into my card. Once I had all the foam tape on there, I added my sequins, and I wanted those little sections to be really full, so I used quite a few sequins. Then I removed all of the release paper, and I took a second piece of acetate that's cut the same size, so slightly smaller than 3¼ inches wide by 8½ inches long, and again just was able to line up the top 2 corners and trim off the excess. I set that aside, and then I stamped the medium and small balloon from the Happy Everything set with red ink, and I used VersaFine Onyx black ink for the balloon strings. After I'd cut those out with my scan and cut, I kind of played around with the placement on the front of the card, and once I was happy with it, I did use liquid glue to adhere those down. And for this, I decided to use liquid glue just so that I had that little bit of wiggle room, and I also didn't have to worry about getting it all over the acetate. Now you'll notice that I have my bottle of glue laying on its side when I set it down, and that helps prevent air bubbles, so when I pick it back up, it doesn't end up spitting all over the back of the balloons. After I had the balloons adhered in place, I used a little bit of liquid glue on the back side, and I only applied it to the back side where the sentiments were put into the frames. I adhered that to a piece of black cardstock that measures 3 3/8 by 8 3/8, and then I adhered that to the front of my card. My card base measures 8½ by 7, and then I folded it at 3½ on the 7-inch side, so the finished card is 3½ by 8½. I added a little bit of shimmer to the balloons using my Wink of Stella glitter pen, and then I used liquid glue to adhere the little bees into place. I wanted to add some shine to the sunglasses, so I used Glossy Accents to do that. And of course I had to add shimmer to their wings, so again I used my Wink of Stella glitter pen for that. And that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.